Hello and welcome to Viewpoints. My name is Tom Ballant and I'm here today with Mark Kaminsky, Federal Air Marshal, and we're here to discuss his master's thesis, Selecting First-Line Supervisors in Homeland Security. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thanks for having me, Tom.
So it's an interesting topic for a thesis. How did you come up with the topic?
Well, looking at the several agencies over my career, whether it be the military or the federal government, it became apparent to me that there's some confusion or potential confusion on the selection process that were used. In order to gain more information, I decided to focus my efforts for my thesis on the first-line supervisor selection in Homeland Security.
What is a first-line supervisor in Homeland Security?
As defined, at least within the thesis, it's those right above a non-supervisor employee. So those who are just, whether it be a team leader or a supervisor, first line, they are first time responsible for managing employees.
So what kinds of employees are first-line supervisors?
It depends on the agencies. I looked at 11 different agencies, some of which were in the Department of Homeland Security, and then also some that fell outside, but had a Homeland Security nexus. So depending on the agency, depends on what the roles and responsibilities were. Some were law enforcement, and some were administrative or non-law enforcement employees.
In looking at all these different agencies, did you find similarities and differences?
I certainly did. Through a multi-method approach using quantitative analysis from survey data from the Federal Human Capital Survey, as well as interview and policy reviews, I was able to analyze the agencies, the 11 agencies, to determine similarities and differences.
And based on these similarities and differences, did you come to some conclusions?
At least initially, based on the research and the results, it appears there are some similarities and differences for the agencies that appear to be more effective and less effective within the survey data. The more effective agencies, as it relates to first-line supervisors, tended to use a multi-hurdle approach to selecting first-line supervisors, whereas the or less effective, I should say, agencies tended to use a one-hurdle approach and also focus more on self-assessment tools as their first hurdle and sometimes their only hurdle.
And what were the hurdles that were used by the two-hurdle agencies?
The more effective agencies that we
Yes, the more effective agencies.
The more effective agencies tended to use multiple hurdles consisting of often interactions, whether it be interviews, also assessment centers where you have multiple assessment tools being applied to the applicant. So the panel that's analyzing or looking at that applicant is able to look collectively over a skill set or the competencies that he or she is looking for to make an educated decision on a best qualified applicant.
And the agencies that used the two-hurdle approach, did they seem to have better supervisors?
Based on the first-line supervisor index that I created as part of this thesis, that is correct. It appears that they have more effective based on perceptive measures, again from the survey data that I collected.
So based upon the research and the findings that you have, do you have any recommendations that you can make for first-line supervisors, for agencies when they're evaluating first-line supervisors?
Again, I would emphasize that there's no cookie-cutter approach, but at least the evidence that came out of this research appears to point to a couple things. One, a multi-method or multi-hurdle approach to selection processes seems to be more effective in selecting first-line supervisors. Also, because the dynamics within agencies, if OPM is able to take a more active role with the selection or at least guidelines for the selection of first-line supervisors, it seems that agencies could potentially benefit from a common guideline, if you will.
And how is this going to help Homeland Security?
Well, Homeland Security, as we all know, is very, very dynamic and diverse, and it covers several agencies. When you start establishing maybe standards or commonalities or best practices for first-line supervisor selection, you understand then how you can motivate, mentor, and really build up the fundamentals of an agency, which is the non-supervisor employees. Those are the ones who are going to be potentially looking or identifying a threat. With good first-line supervisors, kind of guiding them and understanding their needs, wants, and desires, those employees will be more motivated to detect, deter, and find threats to the Homeland Security.
So if the recommendations in your thesis were implemented, we'd be able to have a more secure homeland.
At least it would be one step in a many-step process that would be definitely beneficial to enhancing Homeland Security.
Once you completed your thesis, did you identify any areas of future research that would help to further your process along?
Absolutely. As I kind of mentioned earlier, this is really a first kind of step where you're taking perceptive measures, survey data, and putting it against interviews or policies on how first-line supervisors are selected. Much more research needs to be done on a much larger scale, whether it be more interviews, looking at more agencies. Again, I only looked at 11 agencies to get a much better idea of best practices, because I think we'd agree that in order to get best practices, it can't be a one-off. It has to be based on several agencies, understanding the dynamics potentially within the agency. So future research, in my recommendation, would be to focus on other agencies, possibly using an index that was created within the thesis that I wrote, but using that to further guide and understand best practices for first-line supervisors in Homeland Security.
The agencies you looked at were federal agencies?
They were all federal agencies, that's correct.
Do you think the findings that you have are applicable to state and local governments also?
That would be absolutely additional research that needs to be done. I have no evidence at this point. I did look briefly at some of the private companies, large companies, and they've done extensive studies that would lead me to believe that there would be some crossover to the local state agencies, but that was not included in my thesis.
That's very interesting research you have there. I hope that we'll be able to make something of it in the future. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.